We have more technology than any king or queen could have ever dreamed of. We can talk to someone on the other side of the world instantly. We can order food to our door in minutes. We have access to all the information ever recorded right in our pockets. But are we happier? Are we healthier? Are we more connected to each other and our world? Some numbers say no. Our rates of loneliness are at an all-time high. Anxiety and depression are epidemic. Our food system makes us sick. Our jobs burn us out. Our planet is struggling under the weight of our waste. We live in a world of incredible convenience, but it often feels like we've lost something fundamental along the way. We solved the problem of survival, but we created 1,000 new problems about how to live. What if some of the answers aren't in the future? What if they're in the past? The Middle Ages get a bad rap. We call them the Dark Ages. We picture mud, disease, and superstition. And sure, there was plenty of that. But it was also a time that lasted 1,000 years. 1,000 years of people solving everyday problems. Problems of community, work, health, and justice. They did it without plastics, without the internet, and without a global supply chain. They had to be clever. They had to be resourceful. And some of their solutions were so elegant, so human scaled, that they might just be what we need to remember today. What if their world, for all its hardships, held secrets to a more sustainable, connected, and meaningful life? What did they know that we have forgotten? Number 16. What if your job was also your family? We live in the age of the gig economy. We are freelancers, contractors, and temporary workers. We switch jobs every few years. Loyalty between a company and an employee is a quaint, outdated idea. The result is a workforce that is often precarious, isolated, and lacking in power. We have professional networks on LinkedIn, but how many of us have a true professional community? A group of people who not only work in our field, but also guarantee the quality of our work, train the next generation, and support our families if we fall on hard times. It sounds like a fantasy. But for centuries, it was the reality. It was called a guild. In medieval Europe, if you were a skilled artisan, a stonemason, a weaver, a goldsmith, a baker, you were likely part of a guild. The guild wasn't just a union. It was an all-encompassing social and economic institution. It was your school, your quality control board, your insurance provider, and your social club. The journey began as an apprentice. A young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, would be sent to live with a master craftsman. For the next 7 to 10 years, he would learn the trade from the ground up. He wasn't just learning skills, he was being absorbed into a culture. He learned the secrets of the craft, the standards of quality, and his place in the community. After his apprenticeship, he became a journeyman. He could now travel and work for other masters, honing his skills and seeing how things were done in different cities. To become a master himself, he had to produce a masterpiece. This was a piece of work submitted to the guild elders to prove he had achieved the highest level of skill. If it was accepted, he could open his own shop, take on his own apprentices, and become a voting member of the guild. This system, detailed by historians like Stephen A. Epstein in his book Wage and Labor in Late Medieval Europe, created a powerful cycle of learning, mentorship, and quality. The guild's obsession with quality was legendary. They set the prices for goods, but they also set incredibly high standards. A baker's guild would specify the exact weight and ingredients of a loaf of bread. A weaver's guild would dictate the thread count of a piece of cloth. If a member produced shoddy work, they faced fines or even expulsion. This protected the consumer, but more importantly, it protected the reputation of the craft and the city itself. The great cathedrals of Europe weren't built by a general contractor hiring the lowest bidder. They were built by a consortium of stonemasons, carpenters, and glaziers guilds, each member taking immense pride in their work because their name, and the guild's name, was on the line. But the guild's role went far beyond work. Guilds were powerful social safety nets. They collected dues from members and used the money to support those who fell ill or could no longer work. They provided for the widows and orphans of deceased members, ensuring they didn't fall into poverty. They organized feasts, religious processions, and festivals, building a strong sense of camaraderie and shared identity. In a world without state-sponsored welfare or social security, the guild was your family. It was a system of mutual obligation. You contributed when you were able, and you were cared for when you were in need. The London-based Worshipful Company of Mercers, for example, was chartered in 1394 and still exists today, though now primarily as a charitable and educational institution. Its long history shows the deep roots of this model. Could we bring this back? It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. We see echoes of it. Open source software communities operate on a similar ethos of mentorship, quality control through peer review, and shared purpose. Artisan collectives and craft breweries often form associations to share knowledge and marketing resources. Some trade unions still maintain apprenticeship programs that echo the old model. But we have largely replaced this deep community-based system with a transactional one. We have resumes instead of masterpieces. We have HR departments instead of guild halls. We have networking events instead of shared feasts. The modern world prizes flexibility and disruption above all else. A guild with its rules and traditions can seem rigid and slow to innovate. And they certainly have their downsides. Guilds could be fiercely exclusive, limiting membership to the sons of existing masters and discriminating against outsiders, particularly women and minorities. They could stifle competition and become cartels, but they offered something we have desperately lost: a sense of stability, belonging, and shared pride in a job well done. They understood that work is never just about the money, it's about mastery, community, and leaving a legacy. If today's tech giants like Google or Apple were structured as guilds instead of corporations, how would their products and their company culture be different? What happens to the concept of disruptive innovation in a system that values stability and tradition over rapid change? Are we willing to trade some individual freedom and the potential for massive wealth for the collective security and guaranteed quality that a guild provides? And could a global digital guild ever replicate the deep face-to-face trust and obligation of a medieval town? Number 15. What if the park belonged to everyone for real? We think of property as a simple thing. You either own it or you don't. A piece of land is private, owned by a person or a corporation, or it's public, owned by the government. We can visit a public park, but we can't graze our cow there. We can look at a corporate campus, but we can't forage for berries. The idea of land that belongs to no one and everyone at the same time feels alien to us. But for most of human history, it was the norm. It was called the commons. In a typical medieval village, the land was a patchwork. There were the private strips in the fields, farmed by individual families. There was the Lord's demesne, his private land, and then there was the commons. This was land often pasture, forests, or marshland that was not owned by any single person but was managed and used by the entire community. On the commons, any villager had the right to graze their livestock, gather firewood, let their pigs forage for acorns, and collect herbs or berries. These weren't trivial perks, they were essential for survival. The commons provided the resources that a family's small plot of land could not. It was the village's collective safety net. This system was not a free-for-all. It was governed by a complex set of unwritten rules and customs enforced by the community itself. You could graze your 2 cows, but not 20. You could gather fallen wood, but not chop down a living tree. These rules prevented any one person from overusing and destroying the shared resource. This was a system of stewardship, not ownership. It was based on the idea that the land was a gift to be used by the current generation and passed on to the next. The importance of these rights was so fundamental that they were even codified. In 1217, England's Magna Carta was reissued alongside a companion document, the Charter of the Forest, which explicitly protected the rights of commoners to use the royal forests. It was a landmark acknowledgement that a person's survival could depend on access to land they did not personally own. What happened to the commons? It was systematically destroyed, primarily through a process called enclosure. Starting in the late Middle Ages and accelerating dramatically in the 18th and 19th centuries, wealthy landowners and Parliament began passing acts to fence off the common lands and convert them to private property. The historian E.P. Thompson, in his seminal work, The Making of the English Working Class, powerfully described the devastating social impact of this shift. Families, who had relied on the commons for generations, were suddenly cut off from their livelihood. They could no longer keep a cow for milk or gather wood for their fire. This dispossession created a vast new class of landless poor, forced to either work for low wages for the new landowners or move to the burgeoning, squalid cities to seek work in factories. The social fabric of the village, woven from shared resources and mutual responsibilities, was torn apart. The argument for enclosure was that private ownership led to more efficient and productive agriculture. This is the logic behind Garrett Hardin's famous 1968 essay, The Tragedy of the Commons, which argued that any shared resource will inevitably be destroyed by individual self-interest. But Hardin's theory has been widely criticized, notably by political economist Elinor Ostrom, who won a Nobel Prize for her work on the subject. Ostrom studied how real communities around the world successfully manage common resources, from fisheries to forests. She found that the tragedy only occurs in an open access free-for-all. Successful commons, like the medieval ones, have clear boundaries, community-agreed rules, and methods for resolving conflict. The medieval commons wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph of sustainable community management. We live in the world enclosure created. We have an abundance of private wealth and a poverty of public goods. Our cities have beautiful private gardens behind walls and often desolate, underfunded public parks. We have lost our connection to the land and the food it provides. We see nature as something to be visited on vacation, not as an integral part of our daily lives. Bringing back the commons doesn't mean tearing down all the fences, but it does mean rethinking our relationship with land and resources. It looks like the community garden movement, which turns neglected urban plots into shared spaces for growing food. It looks like the land trust model, where land is purchased and held in common for conservation or affordable housing. It looks like the open source software movement, or Wikipedia, which are vast digital commons of knowledge created and maintained by a community for the benefit of all. It's about remembering that not everything of value needs to have a price tag and a deed. Some things are most valuable when they belong to everyone. If we were to e-common 10% of the private land in a major city, what would we do with it, and how would it change urban life? What is the most important commons of the 21st century? Our digital data, the atmosphere, our genetic code, and how is it currently being enclosed? Is the modern human, raised on a diet of individualism and consumerism, even capable of the shared stewardship required to manage a commons successfully? Or would the tragedy in an age of anonymity be inevitable? Number 14. What if learning a job took 7 years of your life? Our education system is obsessed with speed and scale. We push students through standardized curricula, test them, and graduate them in 4 years, often saddled with debt and with little practical experience. In the professional world, we jump from job to job, picking up skills on the fly or through weekend workshops and online courses. We value disruption and moving fast and breaking things. The idea of spending 7 years in intense, one-on-one training to master a single craft seems impossibly inefficient. It seems medieval, and it was called apprenticeship. The medieval apprenticeship was the dominant form of education for anyone who wasn't destined for the church or the nobility. It was the path to becoming a skilled member of society. As mentioned with guilds, a child would leave home to live with a master craftsman. This wasn't just a job, it was a complete immersion. The master was legally in loco parentis, responsible for the apprentice's housing, food, and moral upbringing. The apprentice, in turn, owed the master obedience and labor. The first years were filled with menial tasks, sweeping the shop, fetching materials, running errands. This wasn't just drudgery, it was a way to learn the rhythms of the workshop, the names of the tools, and the properties of the materials. Gradually, the apprentice would be given more complex tasks. A young carpenter might start by learning to sharpen tools, then how to plane a board, then how to cut a simple joint. The learning process was slow, repetitive, and deeply physical. It was learning by watching, by imitating, and by doing. There were no textbooks or lectures. Knowledge was transferred directly from the master's hands to the apprentices. The master would correct mistakes immediately, a tap on the hand, a sharp word, a demonstration of the proper technique. This created a tight feedback loop that is impossible to replicate in a classroom of 30 students. A study from the University of London's Institute of Education has consistently shown that one-on-one tutoring is one of the most effective educational interventions possible. And a medieval apprenticeship was, in essence, a 7-year-long private tutoring session. The goal was not just competence, it was mastery. The apprentice was not just learning a set of skills, but an entire way of being. They learned the tacit knowledge of the craft, the feel of the wood, the sound of a perfectly struck nail, the smell of the hot forge. This is the kind of deep embodied knowledge that cannot be written down or taught in a classroom. It can only be absorbed through long practice and mentorship. The 7-year term, which was standard in many trades like those governed by England's 1563 Statute of Artificers, was not arbitrary. It was considered the time necessary to move from clumsy novice to capable journeyman, to have experienced the seasonal cycles of the work, and to have internalized the craft so deeply that it became second nature. Compare this to our modern approach. We front-load education, cramming abstract knowledge into young people's heads for 12 to 16 years, and then release them into the workforce to figure out how to apply it. The link between learning and doing is often severed. Many students graduate without ever having seen the inside of the workplace they are supposedly training for. The result is a constant complaint from employers about a skills gap and graduates who feel unprepared for the realities of their jobs. We are seeing a quiet resurgence of the apprenticeship model. Modern apprenticeships in fields like plumbing, welding, and electrical work have always existed and remain a vital pathway to a stable, well-paying career. But the model is expanding. We now see tech apprenticeships where aspiring software developers learn on the job at companies like Google and IBM, earning a salary instead of accumulating debt. The vocational education systems in countries like Germany and Switzerland, which are heavily based on a dual system of classroom learning and paid-on-the-job apprenticeship, are often held up as the gold standard, resulting in low youth unemployment and a highly skilled workforce. Bringing back the spirit of apprenticeship means valuing mastery over credentials. It means recognizing that the most profound learning happens through doing, not just through listening. It means creating more pathways into the workforce that don't require a 4-year degree and a mountain of debt. It means fostering mentorship relationships that last for years, not just for a semester. It's a slower, more deliberate, more human way to learn. It treats a person's education not as a product to be consumed, but as a craft to be honed over a lifetime. If a university degree were replaced by a mandatory 5-year apprenticeship for most professions, how would that change our society's class structure and its definition of an educated person? What would happen to the entire higher education industry? Could the deep, personal, and often harsh master-apprentice relationship even survive in a modern world with our current understanding of labor laws and child welfare? What valuable skills or ways of thinking are lost when we prioritize the speed of learning over its depth? Number 13. What if your feet were your primary car? We have a problem with movement, or rather a lack of it. We drive to work, sit at a desk for 8 hours, drive home, and sit on the couch. Public health officials call it the sedentary crisis. A 2018 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that only about 23% of American adults get the recommended amount of physical activity. This lifestyle is a major contributor to our epidemics of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and even mental health issues. We try to solve this problem by exercising. We buy gym memberships we don't use. We schedule 30-minute runs into our packed calendars. We treat physical activity as a chore, another task to be checked off our to-do list. For a medieval person, this entire concept would be baffling. They didn't exercise. They simply lived. Their lives were an endless stream of functional, necessary movement. And the most fundamental form of this movement was walking. In the pre-industrial world, walking was the default mode of transportation for almost everyone. The wealthy might have horses, but for the common person, if you wanted to get somewhere to the fields, to the market, to the next village, to church, you walked. This wasn't a leisurely stroll in the park. This was life. Distances we would consider a short drive were a significant journey on foot. For a 5-mile trip to the nearest market, town was a 2-hour walk each way, a substantial part of the day. A longer journey, like a pilgrimage from London to Canterbury, as described in Chaucer's famous tales, was a multi-day trek of nearly 60 miles. People's bodies were adapted to this reality. They were leaner, stronger, and had a level of cardiovascular fitness that would put most modern office workers to shame. Research on modern-day hunter-gatherer societies like the Hadza of Tanzania, who have a lifestyle with similar physical demands to our pre-agricultural ancestors, shows they easily clock 5 to 10 miles of walking per day and have exceptionally low rates of cardiovascular disease. The medieval world was built to a human scale. Cities and towns were dense and compact because they had to be. A city was defined by the distance a person could comfortably walk across it. Streets were narrow and winding, not designed for the passage of vehicles, but for the flow of people, carts, and animals. The urban planner and historian Lewis Mumford wrote extensively about how the pre-industrial city was inherently pedestrian-oriented, fostering a level of street life and social interaction that was obliterated by the automobile. The town square, the market, the well, these were all central gathering points that people walked to, creating daily opportunities for chance encounters and community connection. Our world, by contrast, is built for the car. We have sprawling suburbs where it's impossible to get a gallon of milk without driving. We have cities sliced apart by massive highways. We have designed walking out of our lives. We have made the most natural, basic human form of movement an inconvenience. We have traded strong legs and healthy hearts for the convenience of a 10-minute commute. The solution isn't to abandon our cars and start walking 20 miles a day, it's to start rebuilding our world on a more human scale. This is the core idea behind the new urbanism movement, which advocates for walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods. It's the principle behind the 15-minute city concept, popularized by Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, where all essential services, shops, schools, parks, healthcare are accessible within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from home. It's about designing communities where walking is not just possible, but the most pleasant, logical, and efficient way to get around. This means wider sidewalks, narrower streets to slow down traffic, more green spaces, and zoning laws that allow for corner stores and cafes to exist in residential areas. It's a simple, medieval idea: build a world for people, not for cars. The benefits go far beyond physical health. Walkable communities have been shown to have stronger social ties, lower crime rates, and better local economies. When you walk through your neighborhood, you see your neighbors, you notice the small details. You are part of the life of the street. It grounds you in your physical place in the world in a way that driving through it in a metal box never can. We may have forgotten how to walk, but our bodies and our communities have not forgotten how much they need us to. If we redesigned our cities to make driving inconvenient and walking the easiest option, what would be the immediate economic and social consequences? How much of our modern epidemic of loneliness is simply a result of urban design that isolates us from one another? Could we ever overcome the powerful political and economic forces of the automotive and oil industries to make such a radical change? And is there a fundamental conflict between the American dream of a single-family home with a big yard and the creation of a truly walkable, healthy society? Number 12. What if your food was alive? We live in a world of sterile, stable, long-lasting food. We pasteurize our milk, irradiate our spices, and fill our bread with preservatives. Our food is designed to sit on a shelf for weeks or months without changing. We see any sign of microbial life up, a spot of mold, a funny smell, as a sign of spoilage and danger. Our fear of germs has led us to create a food system that is incredibly safe in one sense, but dead in another. And in killing all the bacteria in our food, we may be starving the trillions of good bacteria that live inside us. A medieval person would find our food bizarre. Theirs was a world without refrigeration. Preservation was a constant challenge and a daily reality. One of the primary methods they used across almost every culture was fermentation. Fermentation is the controlled action of microorganisms, bacteria, and yeast to transform food. It's a way of encouraging beneficial microbes to thrive so they can outcompete the ones that cause spoilage. This process not only preserves the food, but fundamentally changes it, creating new flavors, textures, and nutritional benefits. Think of the staples of the medieval diet. They didn't just drink milk, they turned it into cheese and yogurt. They didn't just eat cabbage, they fermented it into sauerkraut or kimchi. They didn't just drink grape juice, they fermented it into wine. They didn't just grind grain in water, they used sourdough starters, a living culture of wild yeast and bacteria, to make their bread rise. These weren't niche artisanal products, they were the basis of the everyday diet. This constant consumption of live culture foods meant they were seeding their guts with a rich and diverse community of microbes every single day. It's only in the last few decades that modern science has begun to understand the profound importance of the gut microbiome. The collection of bacteria, viruses, and fungi living in our digestive tract is now seen as a critical organ that influences everything from our digestion and immune system to our mood and mental health. A healthy, diverse microbiome is essential for well-being, and our modern sterile diet is starving it. The work of scientists like Justin and Erica Sonnenberg at Stanford University, authors of The Good Gut, highlights how the lack of fiber and fermented foods in the Western diet has led to a catastrophic loss of microbial diversity compared to people living more traditional lifestyles. This loss is linked to a host of modern ailments, from autoimmune diseases and allergies to obesity and depression. The great shift away from fermented foods began in the 19th century with the work of Louis Pasteur. His discovery that microorganisms cause disease and spoilage led to the development of pasteurization, a process of heating liquids to kill bacteria. This was a monumental public health breakthrough that saved countless lives by making milk and other foods safe. But it was an indiscriminate weapon. It killed the good bacteria along with the bad. This, combined with the rise of industrial food production and the demand for shelf-stable products, led to the gradual disappearance of living, fermented foods from our diet. We traded the microbial richness of sauerkraut for the sterile predictability of canned vegetables. The good news is that this is one of the easiest medieval solutions to bring back. We are in the midst of a fermentation revival. You can now find kombucha, kefir, and kimchi in most mainstream supermarkets. People are baking their own sourdough bread and brewing their own beer at home. This isn't just a foodie trend, it's a recognition that food should be alive. It's a way to reconnect with the ancient microbial world that we are a part of. Eating fermented foods is a simple act of rewilding our inner ecosystem. It challenges our modern obsession with sterility and control. It asks us to trust in a process we can't fully see, to work in partnership with a world of invisible organisms. It's a small rebellion against an industrial food system that gives us food that is clean, consistent, and dead. It's a return to a diet that is dynamic, flavorful, and teeming with life. If the FDA and other food safety agencies were to actively promote the consumption of raw, unpasteurized, and fermented foods, how would it change the landscape of public health and foodborne illness? What unknown microbial species and their health benefits have we lost forever due to the industrialization of our food? As we learn more about the gut-brain axis, will we one day have psychiatrists prescribing specific strains of bacteria or types of fermented foods to treat anxiety and depression? Is it possible that the plagues of modern chronic illness are in part a long-term consequence of Pasteur's otherwise life-saving discoveries? Number 11. What if your clothes were meant to last 100 years? Look inside your closet. How old is the average item of clothing? 5 years? 2? 6 months? We live in the era of fast fashion. Clothes are cheaper, more abundant, and more disposable than ever before. We buy a shirt for the price of a sandwich, wear it a few times until it loses its shape or the trend passes, and then we throw it away. The average American discards about 81 pounds of clothing each year. Globally, the textile industry produces an estimated 92 million tons of waste annually. Our relationship with our clothes is fleeting, transactional, and incredibly destructive. A medieval person owned very few items of clothing. A common peasant might have had 1 or 2 outfits made of durable wool or linen. These garments were not fashion statements, they were essential tools for survival. They were expected to last for years, even decades. This wasn't because of some innate moral superiority. It was born of necessity. Fabric was incredibly expensive and labor-intensive to produce. The process of raising sheep, shearing wool, spinning it into thread, and weaving it into cloth was a monumental undertaking. A single garment represented a huge investment of time and resources. As a result, clothes were treated with a level of care that is almost unimaginable to us. This gave rise to a powerful mending culture. When a garment developed a hole or a tear, it wasn't thrown away. It was repaired. Mending was not a sign of poverty, it was a sign of common sense. The people possessed sophisticated sewing and darning skills. A hole in a woolen tunic would be carefully rewoven. A patch would be applied to a worn-out elbow. When a garment was finally beyond repair, it was not discarded. It was given a second, third, and fourth life. It would be cut down to make clothes for a child. When it was too ragged for that, it would be torn into strips to be used as cleaning rags, bandages, or stuffing for mattresses. At the very end of its life, the natural fibers of wool or linen would simply decompose and return to the soil. There was no concept of textile waste because nothing was ever truly wasted. The archaeological finds from places like the Viking settlement in York, England, dating back to the 10th century, reveal textiles with numerous patches and repairs, showing how garments were maintained over long periods. Wills and inventories from the late Middle Ages often list individual items of clothing as significant assets to be passed down from one generation to the next. A good cloak was a valuable inheritance. This stands in stark contrast to our world, where clothes are often so poorly made that they aren't even worth the effort of mending. The seams are weak, the fabric is thin, and the construction is flimsy. Fast fashion is designed to fall apart. Its business model depends on it. Reviving a mending culture is a radical act in the face of consumerism. It's a rejection of the idea that new is always better. It's a commitment to the things we already own. This movement is already underway. There are repair cafes popping up in cities where people can bring their broken items, clothes, electronics, furniture, and learn how to fix them with the help of volunteers. There is a growing online community sharing skills in visible mending, an aesthetic that celebrates the repair itself, using contrasting threads and decorative stitches to turn a flaw into a feature. Companies like Patagonia have built their brand around durability and repair, offering lifetime guarantees and teaching their customers how to fix their own gear. Bringing this back means shifting our mindset. It means buying fewer, better things. It means choosing clothes made from durable, natural materials. It means learning basic sewing skills, or at least knowing someone who has them. It means, seeing a patch not as a mark of shame, but as a badge of honor, a story of a garment loved and cared for. It requires us to slow down and value stewardship over novelty. It asks us to see our possessions not as disposable props in our lives, but as long-term companions on our journey. It's a simple, powerful way to fight back against a throwaway culture that is trashing our planet and emptying our wallets. If every piece of clothing we bought came with a 50-year warranty, how would that single change completely restructure the global economy? What would happen to the millions of people in developing countries whose livelihoods currently depend on the fast fashion industry? Is there a psychological limit to how long we can be content with the same items, or is our desire for novelty a fundamental human trait that can't be overcome? If we stop throwing away clothes, what would be the next category of consumer goods to become hyper-disposable? Number 10. What if the pharmacy was a garden? Our approach to medicine is technological, targeted, and powerful. We have antibiotics that can cure deadly infections, statins that can lower cholesterol, and a vast arsenal of pharmaceuticals that can manage a huge range of conditions. We have isolated active compounds, synthesize them in labs, and package them into pills of precise dosages. This system has saved countless millions of lives and is one of the triumphs of modern science. But it has also created a disconnect. We see illness as a specific problem to be solved by a specific chemical. We often neglect the holistic picture of our health, and we have forgotten that for most of human history, the pharmacy was not a building but a field, a forest, a garden. Medieval medicine was a complex blend of religion, superstition, and surprisingly sophisticated empirical knowledge. While humoral theory, inherited from the Greeks, dominated academic medicine, the everyday healthcare for the vast majority of people was in the hands of local healers, wise women, and monastic infirmarians. Their primary tool was herbalism. They possessed an incredible depth of knowledge about the medicinal properties of the plants that grew around them. This was a living, evolving tradition passed down through generations. A monastery garden, for example, was not just a source of food, it was a living medicine cabinet. Monks meticulously cultivated herbs for treating all sorts of common ailments. We know a great deal about this from texts like the Plan of St. Gall, a famous 9th century architectural drawing of an ideal monastery, which includes a detailed plan for a physic garden with specific plants like sage, rosemary, mint, and fennel. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, wrote extensive treatises like Physica, which cataloged the medicinal uses of hundreds of plants, animals, and minerals. Her work was a mix of folk knowledge and personal observation. She recommended willow bark, which we now know contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin, for fever and pain. She used lavender for calming the nerves and promoting sleep. This wasn't just guesswork. People learned through centuries of trial and error what worked. They learned that a poultice of yarrow could help stop bleeding. It contains compounds that aid in blood clotting. They knew that chewing on a leaf of comfrey could soothe a sore throat. They understood that a tea made from chamomile flowers could settle an upset stomach. This knowledge was deeply integrated into daily life. People didn't just turn to plants when they were sick, they consumed them regularly as part of their diet, in teas, soups, and salads, which likely had a powerful preventative effect. Modern pharmacology has, in many ways, simply confirmed and refined this ancient wisdom. A significant percentage of our modern drugs are derived directly from or inspired by natural plant compounds. Aspirin came from willow bark. The heart medication digoxin comes from the foxglove plant. The powerful cancer drug Taxol was originally derived from the bark of the Pacific yew tree. We have become incredibly good at isolating the single active ingredient from these plants. But in doing so, we sometimes lose the synergistic effects of the whole plant, which contains a complex cocktail of compounds that may work together to enhance effectiveness and reduce side effects. A 2011 study in the British Journal of Pharmacology, for instance, discussed this concept of phytochemical synergy and how it challenges the single compound model of modern drug development. Bringing back herbalism doesn't mean abandoning modern medicine. That would be foolish and dangerous. You can't treat a bacterial infection with a cup of tea, but it does mean reintegrating this older wisdom into our lives. It means seeing our health in a more holistic way. It means planting a pot of mint on our windowsill for an upset stomach or lavender in our garden for better sleep. It means learning to identify a few local, useful plants on a walk in the woods. It means understanding that some of the most powerful medicine might not be in a pill bottle, but growing right outside our door. It's a way of reclaiming some autonomy over our own health. It reconnects us to the natural world and reminds us that we are not separate from it. It encourages us to pay closer attention to our bodies and to treat minor ailments with gentle, natural remedies first. It's a quieter, slower, more personal form of medicine that can exist beautifully alongside the powerful interventions of the modern doctor. If pharmaceutical companies could not patent natural plant compounds, would they have any financial incentive to study the potential of herbal medicine? What vast medical knowledge held by indigenous and traditional cultures has already been lost forever. As climate change alters ecosystems, what potential cures for future diseases are we currently driving to extinction? Could a future healthcare system ever successfully integrate traditional herbalists alongside doctors and surgeons, and what would that look like? Number 9, what if you had to pay for your crime instead of just doing time? Our justice system is primarily based on punishment. If you commit a crime, you are removed from society and locked away in a prison. The idea is that this serves 4 main purposes. It incapacitates the offender, it deters others, it allows for rehabilitation, and it provides retribution for the victim and society. In reality, our system often fails on most of these counts. Prisons are incredibly expensive, they have high rates of recidivism, they do little to help the victim, and they often break apart families and communities. We have a system that is very good at warehousing people, but not very good at repairing harm. Early medieval justice systems, particularly in the Germanic cultures of Northern Europe like the Anglo-Saxons, had a different approach. While they certainly had forms of capital and corporal punishment, their system was largely based on the concept of restorative justice. The primary goal was not to punish the offender, but to restore the peace that had been broken and to compensate the victim for the harm they had suffered. The central mechanism for this was the Wergeld, which literally translates to Mahnpreis. Wergeld was a detailed system of financial restitution. Every person in society, from the king down to the peasant, had a specific value assigned to them. And every possible injury, from a broken fingernail to a severed arm to a killing, had a specific price. If you injured or killed someone, you or your family had to pay the corresponding Wergeld to the victim or their family. The law codes from this period, such as the 7th century laws of King A. Ethelbert of Kent, are fascinatingly specific. They list the fine for knocking out a front tooth 6 shillings, for breaking a thigh 12 shillings, or for slaying a man 100 shillings for a commoner. This might sound like a crude system of putting a price on human life, and in some ways it was. It was deeply unequal, with the Wergeld of a nobleman being many times that of a commoner. But it had some profound effects that our current system lacks. First and foremost, it was victim-centered. The primary focus was on making the victim whole, at least financially. The payment went directly to the person who had been harmed, not to the state. Second, it forced the offender to take direct, tangible responsibility for their actions. Paying a fine that could take years or even a lifetime to settle is a constant, concrete reminder of the harm you caused. It's much harder to ignore than abstract time served in a cell. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it involved the entire community. Wergeld was often a family or clan responsibility. If you couldn't pay, your relatives were expected to help. This meant that the entire community had a vested interest in preventing its members from committing crimes. It created a powerful incentive for families to police their own. The goal was to avoid a blood feud and an endless cycle of revenge killing by substituting a socially agreed upon payment. It was a way of healing a tear in the social fabric, not just punishing an individual. As legal historian Lacey Oliver explores in The Beginnings of English Law, This system was designed to maintain social order in a society without a strong central state or police force. Our modern justice system has largely abandoned this principle. A victim of a robbery might see the thief sent to jail, but they rarely get their stolen property back or receive compensation for their trauma and loss. The state prosecutes the crime, and the victim is often reduced to being a witness. The focus is on the offender's debt to society, not their debt to the specific person they harmed. The principles of Werjeld are seeing a modern revival in the restorative justice movement. This approach brings together victims, offenders, and community members in a mediated conversation. The goal is for the offender to understand the human impact of their actions, to apologize, and to agree on a plan for repairing the harm. This might involve financial restitution, community service, or other actions that directly benefit the victim. Studies by organizations like the Restorative Justice Council have shown that these programs can lead to high levels of victim satisfaction and lower rates of reoffending compared to the traditional court system. It's a shift from a logic of punishment to a logic of repair. It asks a simple medieval question: how can we fix what was broken? If we replace prisons with a system of mandatory lifelong financial restitution for victims, what would happen to the crime rate? Can a price ever truly be put on a human life or on a traumatic experience? Or is the attempt to do so inherently immoral? In our highly individualistic society, could a system that holds families responsible for the actions of their relatives ever be considered fair or workable? What crimes, if any, are so heinous that no amount of repair or restitution is enough, and punishment is the only just response? Number 8. What if your house was made from the dirt in your backyard? Our homes are built from a global catalog of materials. The wood might be from Canada, the drywall from Mexico, the granite countertops from Brazil, and the appliances from China. The construction process is complex, expensive, and generates a massive amount of waste. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, construction and demolition debris accounts for more than twice the amount of generated municipal solid waste in the United States. Our buildings have a huge carbon footprint, not just in their energy use, but in the embodied energy of the materials used to create them. For most of human history, people built their homes from whatever was available right around them. In a forest, you built with wood. In a rocky area, you built with stone. And in many parts of the world, including medieval Europe, you built with the most abundant material of all, dirt. This wasn't a primitive choice, it was an incredibly sophisticated and sustainable one. Techniques like cob, wattle, and daub, and rammed earth were used to create durable, comfortable, and beautiful buildings from the earth itself. Wattle and daub was a common method for infilling the timber frames of medieval houses. The wattle was a woven lattice of wooden strips, like a giant basket. The daub was a sticky mixture of clay, sand, straw, and animal manure, which was smeared onto the wattle. When it dried, it created a strong, insulating, and breathable wall. Cob construction, particularly common in parts of England, involved mixing a similar earthen mixture and building it up in layers to form thick, solid walls without a wooden frame. These weren't just peasant huts, entire villages, and even churches were built this way, and many have survived for centuries. The town of Albi in southern France, for instance, is home to the Sainte-Cécile Cathedral, the largest brick building in the world, a testament to the durability of building with fired earth, a technique dating back millennia. These natural building methods had enormous advantages. The materials were cheap, often free. This made housing radically more accessible. A family could literally build their home with their own hands from the land they lived on. The environmental impact was almost zero. At the end of its life, an earthen building would simply melt back into the ground, leaving no trace and no toxic waste. The buildings were also remarkably comfortable. The thick earthen walls acted as a thermal mass, absorbing the sun's heat during the day and slowly releasing it at night. This kept the interior cool in the summer and warm in the winter, drastically reducing the need for heating or cooling. The walls were also breathable, allowing moisture to pass through, which prevented the buildup of mold and created excellent indoor air quality. Why did we stop building this way? The Industrial Revolution brought mass-produced materials like concrete and steel. They were strong, consistent, and could be used to build bigger and faster. Earthen building came to be seen as backwards, a sign of poverty. We developed a complex system of building codes, often written with these industrial materials in mind, which can make it difficult and expensive to get permits for natural buildings today. We traded the sustainable, healthy, and accessible homes of the past for a system that is expensive, wasteful, and dependent on a global supply chain. But there is a growing movement to bring these ancient techniques back. Natural builders around the world are rediscovering the beauty and practicality of cob, straw bale, and rammed earth construction. And architects and engineers are studying these methods, updating them with modern design principles to create homes that are both ancient and cutting edge. Organizations like the Cobb Cottage Company in Oregon have trained thousands of people in these simple building techniques, empowering them to create their own affordable, sustainable shelters. This is not about abandoning modern technology, it's about combining the best of the old and the new. It's about recognizing that the most advanced building material might not be the one made in a factory, but the one lying right beneath our feet. It's a solution to our housing crisis and our climate crisis that is as old as the hills. If modern building codes were rewritten to prioritize local, natural materials over industrial ones, how would the appearance of our towns and cities change? What skills have we collectively lost by no longer knowing how to build our own shelters? Could a massive shift to earthen building create a new decentralized economy of local builders and material suppliers, or would it be co-opted by large corporations? In the face of increasingly extreme weather events like hurricanes and earthquakes, can these ancient techniques be adapted to meet modern safety standards? Number 7, what if you only ate what was growing right now? We live in a state of perpetual summer. It doesn't matter if it's January in New York, we can buy fresh strawberries from California, tomatoes from Mexico, and asparagus from Peru. The global food system has performed a miracle of logistics, erasing the seasons from our dinner plates. We can have whatever we want whenever we want it. But this convenience comes at a cost. The food is often picked unripe and bred for durability, not flavor. It travels thousands of miles, burning fossil fuels and losing nutrients along the way. And most importantly, we have lost our attunement to the natural rhythms of the place where we live. A medieval person's diet was dictated entirely by the seasons. Their life was a constant dance with the calendar of the earth. Spring was a time of hunger gap, when the winter stores were running low and the first new crops had not yet come in. But it also brought the first tender greens, wild herbs, and fresh eggs. Summer was a time of abundance, fresh vegetables from the garden, berries from the hedgerows, and the first grains. Autumn was the harvest season, a frantic period of gathering and preserving. It was a time of feasting on fresh fruits, root vegetables, and meat from slaughtered livestock. The winter was a time of reliance on preserved foods, salted and smoked meats, dried fruits and beans, pickled vegetables, and heavy breads made from stored grain. This seasonal rhythm was not a choice, it was a reality, but it had profound benefits. First, the food was at its absolute peak of flavor and nutrition. A tomato eaten straight from the vine in August is a completely different food from the hard, pale red sphere sold in the supermarket in February. Eating seasonally means eating food at the moment. It is meant to be eaten. Second, it provided natural dietary variation throughout the year. The light, fresh foods of summer gave way to the dense, hearty foods of winter, a pattern that naturally aligned with the body's changing needs for energy and warmth. Research today, like a 2015 study from the University of California, Davis, shows that the nutritional content of produce can vary significantly depending on the season, suggesting our ancestors were getting different nutrient profiles at different times of the year. The third, and most importantly, it connected people deeply to their local environment. They knew, with an intimacy we can barely imagine, the cycles of the plants and animals around them. They knew when the wild garlic would emerge in the woods, when the blackberries would be ripe for picking, and when the frost would sweeten the parsnips in the ground. This knowledge was essential for survival, and it fostered a deep sense of place and a respect for the land that provided for them. The church calendar itself, with its cycle of fasts and feasts, was often aligned with this agricultural rhythm, weaving the patterns of nature into the very fabric of spiritual life. We can bring this back, and many of us are already trying. The locavore movement and the rise of farmers markets are all about reconnecting with seasonal, local food. Joining a community-supported agriculture CSA program where you receive a weekly box of whatever is being harvested at a local farm is a direct way to experience this rhythm. You learn to cook with what you have. You get excited for the first asparagus of spring, and you eat your fill of zucchini in the summer. You learn the arts of preserving, canning, freezing, drying to enjoy the summer's bounty in the dead of winter. It requires a shift in our expectations. It means accepting that we can't have everything all the time. It means letting go of a rigid meal plan and learning to be creative with the ingredients that are available. But the reward is food that tastes better, is more nutritious, and connects us to the real living world outside our door. It's a way of letting the seasons, not the supermarket, set our table. If the entire world were forced to eat only locally and seasonally for 1 year, what would be the geopolitical consequences? How would major population centers like Tokyo or Las Vegas survive? Has our access to a seasonless diet fundamentally altered our human biology in ways we don't yet understand? Is the desire for variety a luxury, or is it a deep-seated evolutionary drive that a purely seasonal diet cannot satisfy? What new technologies could help us eat locally and seasonally, even in harsh climates, without resorting to a globalized food system? Number 6. What if the sun, not the clock, told you when to sleep? We are a chronically sleep-deprived society. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention calls it a public health epidemic. More than a third of American adults don't get the recommended 7 hours of sleep per night. We try to fight it with coffee, energy drinks, and sheer willpower. We see sleep as a necessary inconvenience and unproductive period of downtime to be minimized. We stay up late, bathed in the blue light of our screens, and then we are jolted awake by an alarm clock in the morning, often when it's still dark outside. We live in a 24/7 world, and our bodies are paying the price. A medieval person's life was governed by the sun. Before the widespread availability of cheap, artificial light, the rhythm of the day was the rhythm of light and dark. When the sun went down, the world became dark, dangerous, and cold. Most work stopped. People would gather around the hearth, the main source of light and heat, for a few hours before heading to bed. Their sleep patterns were dictated not by a clock on the wall, but by the great clock in the sky. Historian Roger E. Kirch, in his groundbreaking book At Days Close Night and Times Past, unearthed a fascinating and long-forgotten aspect of this pre-industrial sleep. By studying hundreds of historical documents, diaries, court records, medical text finances, he discovered that people in the past did not sleep in one solid 8-hour block as we do. They practiced what he calls segmented sleep. They would go to bed a couple of hours after dusk and sleep for about 4 hours. This was the first sleep. They would then wake up for a period of 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night. This was not a restless tossing and turning, it was a quiet, peaceful period of wakefulness. People would use this time to pray, meditate, have sex, talk with their spouse, or perform small chores by candlelight. They would then go back to bed for their second sleep of another 4 hours, waking up around dawn. This pattern appears to have been the norm across Western culture for millennia, and it only began to disappear in the late 17th and 18th centuries with the advent of street lighting, and later, the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the electric light bulb. Its artificial light pushed back the night, and the new factory schedules demanded a more consolidated and regimented approach to time. The quiet, liminal period of wakefulness in the middle of the night was lost, squeezed out by the pressures of modern life. By the 1920s, the idea of segmented sleep had been so completely forgotten that it was no longer mentioned in any literature. Modern sleep science is beginning to suggest that this older pattern might actually be more natural for us. In a famous experiment in the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Ware placed a group of people in an environment with no artificial light for 14 hours a day. Initially, they slept for long periods, but after a few weeks, their sleep patterns began to change. They started sleeping in 2 distinct segments, separated by 1 to 3 hours of calm wakefulness, exactly like the pattern Eckhart described. This suggests that the solid 8-hour block might be a modern invention, and that our bodies may still have a natural inclination towards this segmented sleep. This might explain why so many people today suffer from maintenance insomnia, the experience of waking up in the middle of the night and being unable to fall back asleep. Our modern response is to see this as a disorder, a problem to be fixed with a sleeping pill. But it's possible that our bodies are just trying to revert to their natural ancestral sleep rhythm. We can't all go back to living by the sun and sleeping in 2 shifts. Our world isn't built for it. But we can learn from this. We can be more mindful of our exposure to light, particularly blue light from screens before bed, which is known to suppress the sleep-inducing hormone melatonin. We can try to create a digital sunset in our homes a couple of hours before we plan to sleep. And if we do wake up in the middle of the night, we can perhaps reframe it. Instead of panicking about being awake, we can try to embrace it as a quiet, peaceful time for reflection, just as our ancestors did. It's a reminder that our relationship with sleep, like so many other things, has been profoundly shaped by technologies that have disconnected us from the natural rhythms of the world. If segmented sleep is our natural state, what cognitive or emotional benefits from that middle of the night waking period have we completely lost as a society? Could the widespread adoption of artificial light be one of the single greatest and least examined public health experiments in human history? If a company offered its employees a segmented work schedule to match a segmented sleep pattern, would it be a productive paradise or a logistical nightmare? What would our dreams be like if we experienced them in two distinct cycles every night? Number 5, what if you could build a palace in your mind? We are drowning in information, but our memories seem to be getting worse. We outsource our memory to our devices. Our phone remembers our appointments, our contacts, and our driving directions. We use search engines to look up facts we once would have committed to memory. We have access to more information than ever, but we retain less of it. Our minds, like our muscles, seem to be atrophying from a lack of use. We have forgotten how to remember. In the medieval world, memory was a superpower. Before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, books were rare and precious objects, painstakingly copied by hand. For a scholar, a lawyer, or a priest, the ability to hold vast amounts of information in scripture, legal precedent, philosophical arguments, and in their head was not a party trick, it was an essential professional skill. To do this, they used a powerful set of techniques known collectively as the art of memory, a system inherited from the ancient Greeks and Romans. The most famous of these techniques is the method of Loki, or the memory palace. The principle is simple and brilliant. It harnesses the brain's powerful spatial memory. Our minds are exceptionally good at remembering places we know well, like our childhood home or our daily walk to work. The memory palace technique involves choosing such a familiar place in your mind's eye. You then take the information you want to remember, and you convert it into a series of striking, unusual, and vivid images. Finally, you mentally place these images at specific locations, or loci, along a planned route through your imaginary palace. To recall the information, you simply take a mental walk through your palace and see the images you left there. The more bizarre and emotionally charged the image, the better it sticks. If you wanted to remember a grocery list, carrots, milk, bread, you might imagine a giant orange carrot bursting through your front door, a river of milk flooding your hallway, and a loaf of bread singing opera on your living room couch. It sounds ridiculous, but it works. The historian Frances Yates, in her classic book, The Art of Memory, traces the history of this technique from the ancient orator Cicero through medieval scholastics like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus, who used it to memorize entire books of the Bible and complex theological arguments. For them, a well-trained memory was not just a tool, but a mark of a disciplined and virtuous mind. This was not just for scholars. Bards and storytellers used similar techniques to memorize epic poems that were hours long. The oral traditions that passed down laws, histories, and genealogies relied on these powerful mnemonic structures. Training the memory was a core part of education. It was understood that a strong memory was the foundation of all other learning. The printing press changed everything. As books became cheap and plentiful, the need for this kind of massive internal storage diminished. We began to see the mind less as a palace for storing knowledge and more as a processor for analyzing it. The art of memory fell out of fashion, dismissed as a strange and unnecessary relic. We gained the ability to look everything up, but we may have lost the ability to truly know things, to integrate them into our own minds in a deep and personal way. Today, the memory palace is mostly the domain of mental athletes who use it to perform incredible feats in memory competitions like memorizing the order of a shuffled deck of cards in under 20 seconds. But its principles are available to all of us. It's a powerful tool for students learning a new subject, for professionals who need to give a speech without notes, or for anyone who simply wants to sharpen their mind and rely less on their digital crutches. Learning to build a memory palace is an act of cognitive rebellion. It's a way of reclaiming our own minds from the devices that seek to command our attention and hold our knowledge for us. It is a slow, deliberate, and creative process. It reminds us that our brain is not a hard drive to be filled, but a living, dynamic space that can be cultivated and explored. It's a medieval solution to a uniquely modern problem: how to think for ourselves in an age of infinite information. If schools stopped teaching students how to find information online and instead spent a year teaching them the art of memory, how would that change their cognitive abilities and their relationship with knowledge? What is the neurological difference between information that is stored in a memory palace versus information that is learned by rote memorization? Could a society with a highly developed, shared oral tradition and memory training have a different concept of truth than our text-based, easily edited digital world? If we no longer need to remember facts, what is the ultimate purpose of human memory? Number 4, what if a story was the most important thing you could share? We communicate in short fragmented bursts. We send texts, we post updates, we share memes. We are constantly broadcasting and consuming tiny packets of information. We have more ways to communicate than ever before, but are we really saying anything? How often do we sit down and listen, truly listen, to a long, complex story told by another person? The art of storytelling, of passing down knowledge and wisdom through a shared narrative, feels like it's fading. In a largely illiterate medieval world, oral tradition was the primary way that information was stored, shared, and passed down through generations. This wasn't just about telling fairy tales around the fire, though that was part of it. It was the backbone of the entire culture. Histories, genealogies, laws, religious beliefs, and practical knowledge were all encoded in stories, poems, and songs. A community's identity was held, not in a library, but in the collective memory of its people. The figure of the bard, the scop, or the storyteller was central to this world. These were not just entertainers, they were the living archives of their culture. They could recite epic poems like Beowulf or the Song of Roland from memory, tales that were not only thrilling adventures, but also moral lessons, historical records, and a celebration of the community's values. A performance of such a tale in the Lord's Hall was a major social event, a moment when the entire community came together to remember who they were and where they came from. This tradition required two things that we are short on: highly trained memories and a willingness to listen for long periods. The storytellers used sophisticated mnemonic devices, rhyme, rhythm, alliteration, and formulaic phrases to help them remember thousands of lines of verse. The audience, in turn, developed powerful listening skills. They had to pay close attention to the details of the story, to the nuances of the performance. In an oral culture, listening is not a passive activity, it is an act of co-creation, of bringing the story to life in one's own mind. The work of scholars like Albert Lord and Milman Parry in the 20th century, who studied the living oral traditions of epic singers in the Balkans, revealed the incredible complexity and dynamism of these art forms. They found that each telling of a story was unique, with the singer improvising and adapting the tale for the specific audience and occasion. The arrival of widespread literacy and later the printing press began the long decline of oral tradition. The written word was more stable, more accurate, and could be duplicated perfectly. It was an incredibly powerful technology, but something was lost. A story on a page is static. A story that is told is a living, breathing event. It involves a direct human connection between the teller and the listener. The tone of voice, the gestures, the eye contact, all of these are part of the story's meaning. We traded the warmth and immediacy of the human voice for the cold precision of the printed page. We are seeing a renewed appreciation for the power of oral storytelling. The popularity of podcasts, particularly long-form interview and narrative shows, is a testament to our deep-seated hunger for this form of communication. The Moth, a live storytelling event and podcast where people tell true stories from their lives without notes, has become a global phenomenon. It taps into our fundamental need to connect with each other through personal narrative. The resurgence of audiobooks is another sign that we are rediscovering the joy of being told a story. Bringing back the spirit of oral tradition means making time for it in our own lives. It means putting down our phones at the dinner table and asking our family members to tell us about their day. It means sharing family histories with our children. It means listening without interruption when a friend wants to tell us something important. It's a recognition that the most important information is not always data, but story. A story can convey emotion, context, and wisdom in a way that a bulleted list of facts never can. It is the original human technology for making sense of the world and of each other. If our legal system relied on sworn oral testimony and the memory of community elders rather than written contracts and records, how would our concept of justice and truth change? What unique forms of human intelligence and social cohesion are only possible in a primarily oral culture? As we move into an age of AI-generated text and deepfakes, Could a renewed emphasis on live, in-person storytelling become a crucial way to maintain trust and human connection? Is it possible that the human brain evolved to process information best in a narrative format, and that our modern data-driven world is creating a kind of cognitive dissonance? Number 3. What if a midday nap was mandatory? Our work culture is obsessed with productivity. We celebrate the hustle, the all-nighter, the person who is always on, always available. We see rest as a sign of weakness or laziness. We power through the natural afternoon slump with another cup of coffee and push ourselves to keep working at a steady, relentless pace from morning till evening. The result is a workforce that is burned out, stressed, and often less productive than it could be. We are trying to work like machines, but our bodies and brains are biological and they have their own non-negotiable rhythms. People in the pre-industrial world understood this. Their workday was often shaped by the sun and the seasons, not by the punch clock. In many parts of medieval and early modern Europe, particularly in warmer climates, the day was split into 2 parts, separated by a significant break in the middle of the day. This was not just a lunch break, it was a time for a substantial meal, and often a nap. This practice, which we now associate with the Spanish siesta, was once common across much of the world. The logic was simple and practical. The hours around noon are the hottest part of the day, making strenuous physical labor difficult and dangerous. It was also the time when energy levels naturally dip after the main meal. It made perfect sense to stop work, eat, rest, and then return to the fields or the workshop for a second, more productive session in the cooler late afternoon and early evening. The Roman Catholic Church's canonical hours, which structured the day for monasteries, included the prayer of sext at the 6th hour midday, which was often followed by a period of rest. The word siesta itself comes from this Latin phrase, hora sexta. This rhythm is not just a cultural habit, it is deeply rooted in our biology. We all experience a natural dip in alertness in the early afternoon, typically between 1 and 3 p.m. This is part of our circadian rhythm, the internal body clock that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. It's a post-lunch dip that happens even if you don't eat lunch. Fighting against this natural slump is often a losing battle, leading to decreased productivity, more mistakes, and a general feeling of exhaustion. Modern science has confirmed the wisdom of the midday nap. Numerous studies have shown that a short nap of 20 to 30 minutes can significantly improve alertness, performance, and mood. A 2007 study from Greece that followed over 23,000 people for 6 years found that those who regularly took a midday nap had a 37% lower risk of dying from heart disease. NASA conducted a famous study on its pilots and found that a 26-minute nap improved performance by 34% and alertness by 54%. Where companies like Google and Nike have taken note, installing nap pods in their offices to allow employees to recharge during the day. Despite this evidence, our 9-to-5 workday remains stubbornly resistant to the idea of a midday rest. We see it as a luxury, not a biological necessity. We have structured our society around a linear, industrial model of time that is fundamentally at odds with our own nature. We work through our most unproductive hours and then collapse, exhausted, at the end of the day. Bringing back the siesta doesn't necessarily mean everyone sleeps for 2 hours every afternoon. It means designing a workday that is more in sync with our natural energy cycles. It could mean a longer midday break that allows for a proper meal, a walk, or a short rest. It could mean more flexible work schedules that allow people to work when they are most productive, perhaps earlier in the morning and later in the evening, with a significant pause in the middle. It is a radical idea that challenges one of the most fundamental structures of modern life. It's about recognizing that true productivity comes not from working longer, but from working smarter, and that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is go to sleep. If the 9-to-5 workday was replaced with an 8-to-12 and 4-to-8 schedule with a 4-hour midday break, how would that transform family life, city traffic patterns, and the restaurant industry? Is the afternoon slump a biological relic from a time when humans lived in hotter climates, or is it a universal feature of our species? Could the mandatory midday rest be seen as a form of discrimination against morning people, or those who don't benefit from naps? What is the true economic cost of our collective hustle culture in terms of burnout, healthcare expenses, and lost productivity due to fatigue? Number 2, what if your grocery store was the forest? Our food comes from a supermarket. It is grown on vast industrial farms, often thousands of miles away. It is packaged in plastic and transported by truck. We are completely dependent on this complex, fragile system. Most of us, if we were dropped in the middle of a forest or a field, would have no idea how to feed ourselves. We can identify hundreds of corporate logos, but we can't identify the edible plants growing in our own backyards. We have lost the ancient and essential skill of foraging. For the vast majority of human history, foraging, the gathering of wild food, was not a hobby, it was a fundamental part of survival. Even in the agricultural society of medieval Europe, foraging remained a critical source of food and medicine for the common person. The forests, hedgerows, and meadows were a communal larder. People knew how to identify, harvest, and prepare a huge variety of wild plants, nuts, berries, and fungi. This was not a desperate search for calories. It was a sophisticated and integral part of their diet. Wild greens like nettles, dandelions, and sorrel were some of the first fresh foods available in the spring, providing a much-needed dose of vitamins after a long winter of preserved foods. Berries like blackberries, raspberries, and bilberries were gathered in the summer. In the autumn, people collected nuts like hazelnuts and acorns, which had to be carefully processed to remove tannins. And for those who knew what they were doing, the forest provided a bounty of edible mushrooms. This wild food supplemented the crops they grew in their fields and provided a level of dietary diversity and nutritional resilience that is often missing from our modern diet. This knowledge was encyclopedic and deeply local. People knew the specific microclimates of their landscape. They knew which side of the hill the best berries grew on, which patch of woods was home to the best mushrooms, and when the nettles would be at their most tender. This was a form of literacy, the ability to read the landscape. This knowledge was passed down orally from generation to generation, from parent to child, as they walked the land together. It was a living tradition, a constant conversation between the people and their environment. The existence of the Charter of the Forest of 1217, which guaranteed the rights of commoners to forage in the royal forests, shows how politically and economically important this practice was. Today, foraging is making a comeback, often as a pursuit of gourmet chefs and adventurous foodies. But its potential is much broader. It is a way to get free, healthy, and incredibly flavorful food. It is a powerful antidote to our disconnect from nature. To learn to forage is to learn to see the world with new eyes. A walk in the park is no longer just a walk in the park. It becomes an exploration, a treasure hunt. You start to notice the details, the shape of a leaf, the texture of a bark, the way a plant grows in a particular spot. It forces you to slow down and pay attention. It reconnects you to the seasons and the cycles of the natural world in a profound, hands-on way. Modern foragers and authors like Samuel Thayer in the United States have done incredible work to document and share this knowledge, making it accessible to a new generation. They emphasize the importance of positive identification, of never eating a plant unless you are 100% certain of what it is, and of ethical harvesting, of taking only what you need and leaving plenty for the ecosystem and for others. Foraging is not going to replace our agricultural system, but it doesn't have to. It can supplement it. It can provide us with a deeper connection to our food and our world. It can give us a small measure of self-sufficiency and resilience. It is a way of remembering that the world around us is not just a scenic backdrop. It is a living, breathing system that can, if we know how to ask, provide for us. It is the oldest and most fundamental way of being human. If foraging became a mainstream activity, how would we manage our public lands and parks to prevent overharvesting and ecological damage? What would happen to property laws if people began to assert an ancient right to forage on private land? Is there a danger that widespread foraging could lead to an increase in accidental poisonings? As we lose biodiversity, what crucial knowledge about the edible and medicinal properties of plants are we losing before we even have a chance to document it? Number one, what if nothing was ever thrown away? We live in a world built on waste. We extract resources, manufacture them into products, use them for a short time, and then throw them away. But there is no away. Our waste ends up in overflowing landfills, in the oceans, and even in our own bodies in the form of microplastics. The cradle-to-grave model of our linear economy is reaching its limit. We are drowning in our own trash. The very concept of trash would have been foreign to a medieval person. In a world of scarcity, where nearly everything was made by hand from natural materials, nothing was ever truly thrown away. Everything had value, and everything was part of a cycle. This was a true cradle-to-cradle economy, not by ideological choice, but by stark necessity. Let's consider a single slaughtered pig. In our modern industrial system, we primarily value the choice cuts of meat. Much of the rest of the animal is either rendered into low-value products or discarded. In the medieval household, a pig was a treasure, and absolutely every part of it was used. This is the origin of the nose-to-tail philosophy. The meat was eaten fresh or preserved by salting, smoking, or turning it into sausage. The fat was rendered into lard for cooking and preserving. The organs liver, heart, kidneys were prized dishes. The intestines were cleaned and used as sausage casings. The blood was used to make black pudding. The head was boiled to make brawn or head cheese. Even the bones were boiled for hours to make a nutrient-rich broth, and then could be carved into tools or ornaments. The skin could be turned into leather or fried into cracklings. The bladder could be cleaned and inflated to be used as a ball for children to play with. Nothing was wasted. This principle extended to everything. As we saw with clothing, old textiles were endlessly recycled. Old building materials were salvaged and reused in new structures. Broken pottery shards or sherds are one of the most common archaeological finds, but even these could be ground down and used as grog to strengthen new clay. And human and animal waste was not a disposal problem, it was a valuable resource. It was collected by gong farmers and others and returned to the fields as fertilizer, closing the nutrient loop that we now break with our modern sewer systems and synthetic fertilizers. The entire economy was circular because it had to be. Everything came from the land, and everything was eventually returned to the land. This was not a perfect, pristine world. Medieval towns and cities were certainly dirty and unsanitary by our standards. But they did not produce the kind of permanent, non-biodegradable waste that we do. Like, there were no plastic bags, no styrofoam cups, no disposable electronics. Their waste was organic, and it could be reabsorbed by the ecosystem. Our waste is often toxic and lasts for centuries or millennia. The modern concept that embodies this old wisdom is the circular economy. It's an economic model that aims to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate nature. It's about designing products from the outset to be repaired, reused, remanufactured, and, as a last resort, recycled. It's a massive shift in thinking, from a linear model of take, make, waste to a circular one. Companies like Interface, a modular carpet manufacturer, have pioneered this model by leasing their carpets and taking them back at the end of their life to be completely recycled into new products. It's a recognition that waste is not an inevitability, it's a design flaw. To embrace this medieval solution is to fundamentally change our relationship with stuff. It means seeing the things we own not as disposable but as resources to be stewarded. It means demanding products that are built to last and to be repaired. It means learning to see the value in what we would normally throw away. It's the most ancient economic idea in the world, that there is no such thing as waste, only resources that are in the wrong place. In a world choking on its own garbage, it might be the most important idea we can bring back. If a zero-waste policy were strictly enforced on a national level, making it illegal for any non-biodegradable material to enter a landfill, how would our daily lives and our entire industrial system have to change overnight? What are the worst products of our digital economy? Outdated hardware, abandoned data, wasted electricity, and could we ever create a truly circular digital world? Is the human desire for convenience fundamentally incompatible with a zero-waste society? And ultimately, is our planet's ability to absorb our waste the last great commons that we are in the process of tragically destroying?